So let me tell you briefly about three key policy drivers that I think somehow either explain or are associated to this figure that you saw there. And the first one is the policy related to enhancing or improving equity in our education system. This is one of the critical areas of Finnish education, the history of Finnish education policy during the last 40 years, that it has been mostly focusing on equity, improving equity in the system or equality of opportunity, not so much focusing on achievement or these results. And I want to start by showing what we normally do and try to emphasize the difference between equity and quality. What education reforms normally are doing in this country and around the world is to try to enhance the quality of the education system. Okay? And what do we mean by quality of education system? These are some of the areas that we normally work on when we try to improve the quality of education. We introduce a curriculum reform. We redesign the assessment and testing system. Sometimes have more testing, more standardized testing than we used to have, claiming that we need to have more data, more information about students' performance before we can improve the situation. We may have a focus on leadership, train the principals, train teachers, invest in facilities and ICT and many other areas. And this is what I mean about improving quality as a main area of education reform. But now there's another one, and this is what Finland has been particularly focusing on during the last 30 or 40 years, since the early 1970s, which is the equity in education. And by equity I mean here the education system's capability to cope and deal with the inequalities and diversities that children bring with them when they come to each and every school in the country. Okay? Because otherwise, if the schools don't do anything, then our children's performance in the school can be predicted by looking at their family background, their socioeconomic status and parents' education and some other things. Okay? So if we want to decrease this impact of the family background, the schools and the school system has to do something. And this is what we have been doing. We have been making sure in Finland that the resources are allocated so that they equalize and improve equity. In other words, that those who are in trouble, whether they are teachers, individuals, or schools, or principals, they get more resources so that they can come out of these difficulties. All right? So that's why the school funding system in Finland is still based on the fact that the schools with the more difficult circumstances are having more resources than the schools that don't have these circumstances. We have paid particularly attention to making sure that there's equal access to good schools for everybody. Special education and support for those who need is kind of a flagship of Finnish education reform since the 1970s. We have a huge number of students at the moment in some type of special education in Finland. Actually, it's about more than 30% of our students now in our 9-year comprehensive school are labeled as special needs students. Okay? 9% of them are permanently in a special education, normally within their own school, having a smaller class or kind of a clinic where they go, and about 22% of all students are in a part-time special education. So this means that those Finns who graduate from the 9th year comprehensive school this spring, about half of them have been in some type of special education during their 9 or 10 years of school, which means that the special education is not really special anymore, right? Because almost everybody, majority of students do that. So it's not a stigma or problem for parents to use these services. And the particular feature in Finland with the special education is that we try to intervene early. Day one, when children come to school, we try to make sure that all the help and support is available, rather than wait until the problems are so difficult that we have to do something. Like in many other countries, this is the strategy, that let's help these individuals when they really need help and not before that. Okay? And then of course the early childhood development issues. In Finland, children go to school when they are 7 years of age, so they have 7 years before the formal schooling starts, time to play and develop the... So if the OECD average is somewhere here, and now it's interesting because for the last 10 years we have really had a rich set of data from the OECD to compare different countries. So if the OECD average of equity and quality is somewhere there in the middle, this is how some of the OECD countries map. And England is typically very close to OECD average almost in everything. Yeah? So that's why your flag is there close to the OECD average. And then you can see that there's Canada, Korea, and Japan are there in the top, and some other countries. Of course, there are many other, about 34 countries that should be there, but I just have these ones. Okay, and this is where Finland was in 1970. That's my estimate, that we had a huge inequity in the system and lower than average quality. So Finland was somewhere there. This was the year 1970. And now our road has been something like this. Look at Finland, yeah? It's all the way to the top. Yeah? And I think what is interesting in this, the Finnish roadmap from below average performer in 30 years or 40 years to one of the high performers, according to how OECD is labeling this, has required two things. Okay? Primarily in Finland, it has required heavy investment and work in the equity in education. So this is where most of the attention and our policy has focused during the last 3 or 4 decades, these areas over there. But also simultaneously working on the curriculum, assessment, teachers, leadership, and many other things. But the important finding here is, a notion here is that Finland didn't climb all the way up to this, one of the high-performing education systems by only looking at the quality aspects of education. And this is one of the conclusions that the OECD also has now. I'll get back to this in the end of my presentation. These are some of the examples of the, again, using the OECD data about the inequity or inequality or variation of education systems. You see there, OECD average, this is a variation of students' reading literacy. So basically the length of the bar shows you how big gap there is between poor and high performance in different countries. The first one is the OECD on average, then Finland, and then England over there. So you see that in Finland, the overall variation between students in 2009 reading literacy is smaller than in England and smaller than in the OECD countries. So now we can divide this into two different elements. The one is the blue one, that is a variation within the school, so the factors that are built within the school, and then how much of this variation is coming between the schools. So this is basically telling us how different our schools are in terms of their performance in reading literacy here. And here you see the striking difference between Finnish schools compared to the OECD on average, or England. Let me take this OECD away. So you see that one big difference that we have between our school systems is that the performance variation between the schools. Practically this means in Finland that many or most of the schools are performing very well. So that's why Finnish parents never really talk about education, the school choice, because they know that more or less the schools are performing very, very well. This is of course a statistical conclusion, but this has been well known in Finland at least for the last 20 years.